That looks good, huh? Hey y'all, it's Martin. We're in the studio today and we're making a sourdough pizza. It's a great recipe from Brian Ford. Come along for the video. The recipe is right down there in the link below. Okay, we're gonna make a pre-ferment, right? A pre-ferment. I said it before, this is like a bouillon cube of fermentation flavor. So you're gonna set your pre-ferment a day or two before you wanna bake and get things started. So in my jar, I have 50 grams of sourdough culture, and then I added 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. And all I have to do is stir to combine, and then we're gonna set it in a warm place to rise. And it will be ready after about 3 or 4 hours, something like that. You'll see that it will have doubled, and you could either start the mix at that point, or you could put it in the fridge overnight and use it the next day. It would be fine. If you're gonna do the chilled version where you sort of hold it for a while in the fridge, let it warm back up over a couple hours in a nice comfortable spot so that it's ready with full force to raise the dough. Okay, so happy nappy, have a nice rise. We'll see you soon. So let's get to the mix. I'm gonna start with some water in the bowl. This is warm water. You know, if you're baking in the cooler months of the year, you wanna be really thoughtful about putting the sourdough culture or yeast, if you're using yeast, in an environment which supports its work. So I've got 275 grams of warm water. I'm gonna put that into the bowl. And then I'm gonna put some salt in and get that dissolving. So that's 15 grams of salt. And then I'm gonna get my sourdough culture in, and maybe, you know, before I dump that in there, maybe we'll take a second and just look and see what happened with this. It looks very happy, very active, lots of pinprick bubbles on the surface. I'm gonna take out 200 grams of this. That'll leave me about 50 or so in my container, which I can then use as the seed culture for the next build or whatever, you know, or I could make something else with it. But I have that little extra margin in there to sort of take care of your needs down the road. Magical sourdough culture. Literally billions of little organisms and bacteria in here. An incredible, incredible thing, right? So I'm gonna get my flours in. I'm gonna start with this 00 pizza flour. 00 just refers to a fineness of milling. It's a very finely milled white flour, similar in many ways to AP. So this is 475 grams of 00 flour. To that, and this is one of my favorite things about this recipe, in addition to the fact that it's a sourdough fermentation style, is that it's got a little bit of whole grain in it. And that whole grain is gonna be great fuel for the sourdough culture, which is in there, and it will also be great flavor. I've got a little bit of medium rye, about 13 grams, and I've also got some whole wheat. If you only have whole wheat and you just wanna use that, then just use that. If you've only got rye and you just wanna use that, that's okay too. Because this is entirely leavened with sourdough culture, which does have yeast in it, right? Sourdough culture is a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeasts. It's going to rise, but it's gonna rise slowly. It's sort of a low and slow method. It's like the braising equivalent of bread making. It's important that we set a proper course for fermentation, but I just mentioned that because, you know, this is gonna rise for a long time. But it's worth it because what comes out of the oven is a unique amount of great flavor. So I'm mostly combined here. I'm looking pretty good. The dough is together. It's homogeneous mostly. It has no strength, really. But if I let it rest for a second, it will gain a lot of strength. I'm just going to cover it and let it hang out for a second, come back, and then we'll knead some. So I took about 10, maybe 15 minutes and gave this just a little bit of rest. I'll pull off a piece before I even start kneading it, and we can already see that, guess what? 5, 10, 15 minutes, and the dough, while it tears when stretched thinly, it does have what we would call some extensibility, the ability to stretch. So the first thing you might notice is that there's no flour on my bench. I didn't put any flour down. I don't want to change the ratios between water and flour in this dough. I don't want to change that. Adding flour kind of messes that up a little bit, and it's not really necessary. So what I'm going to do is, I've got this sort of dough on the counter here. I'm going to pick it up right in the middle along its belly, and I'm just gonna slap it down and I'm gonna fold it over. Thus the slap and fold, right? Then I'll come back into that belly again, and I'll slap it, and I just start moving it. And you can be aggressive here, and the dough very quickly will come together. In fact, it's already sort of smoothed out, and you can see how it's springy just with those few sort of actions. So as you work the dough, you're going to notice that it stretches less easily. That's because you're developing these factors of elasticity, that sort of snap back quality, the rubber band quality, which is in this good flour, right? So as you knead, you're going to notice that that develops and it becomes less stretchy. And at a point, it will sort of change from, it'll finally say, all right, I've been stretched to my maximum capacity, and now the only thing that I can do is sort of break or tear. And when we get to that point, that's time to sort of give it a break, you know, wait 5 minutes and then come back. And during that 5 minutes, it's going to sort of relax. It'll sort of like gain back some of that extensibility, right? It'll get easier to stretch. So this process may take you a little while. And if you'd prefer, you could put it in a stand mixer and work it that way. But basically, I'm just going until it's smooth and springy. So I would say that it would be a good idea to stop there and set it back in your bowl and cover it for the 4 hours of bulk fermentation. We'll come back and check on it then and divide. All right, so this dough has had 4 hours. During that 4-hour time period, I left it in a very comfortable spot, you know, 75 degrees or so, nice and coddled, and the dough moved really well as a result, right? It looks active to me. If you remember, if you can go back in your mind to how that dough looked when we put it into the bowl. It's clearly risen really well. It's sort of bouncy. It's definitely doubled in size, so it's ready to divide. Okay, so get your scale out, and for the divide, the way that I like to do it is to put a little bit of flour on top, and then flexible scraper, release it a little bit, and then I'm going to dump it onto a lightly floured surface. Beautiful dough though, man, it really moved well. Partially because I used a good, healthy, active sourdough culture, right? For best fermentation, you want to use a healthy culture. But it also moved well because of the fact that we had a little bit of whole grain in there. That's like super food for the yeast and bacteria. So we're going to divide it into 4 pieces, 225 to 235 grams or so each. So you can start by eyeballing it if you want, and then you can just confirm to make sure that you're in range. All right, 4 even pieces of dough. You want them to be even, and the reason I'm using a scale is because I want the pies to sort of bake up in a similar fashion. I want to stretch them all to the same size and so forth. So, nice even pieces of dough. Now we're going to make them into nice tight rounds. And what I'm going to do that is just pat to degas. And then I'm going to shape them as you would a boule or as you would a round pre-shape. I'm going to start on that outside edge, stretch up, press to the middle, and just work my way around, stretching and pressing to form a round ball of dough. A lot of ways to do this. This is my favorite, and I think it's the one that people can sort of most easily pick up. So it's stretching from the outside, pressing to the center. And you're round enough to proceed. If you want to give it a little bit more of a rounding, you can do this sort of like, you know, this kind of situation, like bring in the mainsail, something like that. I don't know. Okay, nice little round of dough. Let's do that again. And you know, once you get to where this gesture here works for you, the truth is that you can actually just start there. You can just grab the dough and go straight to that sort of like rolling and pressing motion to form your ball, and that's exactly the same. Boom, done. Now, we're gonna put these on a tray to rise overnight. You can do it like I'm doing it. You know, there are other options too. If you have some small containers, I like ones that are about 5 inches in diameter that have a snap-on lid. You can use those as well. If you're gonna put them on a sheet tray, you need to make sure that it's like a spotless sheet tray. At the studio, we have some nice spotless sheet trays. So that's what I like to use. If I'm doing it at home, I usually use a container. If you don't have any spotless sheet trays or containers at your house, what you can do is also just put a piece of parchment down, and then, you know, a little bit of oil on it is actually helpful because it'll help them come off tomorrow when we pull them out of the fridge. And then put them on here so that they have some room to expand, because they will, right? So sort of stagger your pattern. Boom, boom. So 24 to 48 hours or a little bit more in the fridge, and we'll come back and we're gonna make some pizzas. Okay, so I took these doughs out of the fridge 2 hours ago, and what they're doing in that time period is they're coming up to temperature a little bit, they're waking up, they're getting ready to be made into pizza. They look beautiful, they're slightly puffy, but they haven't grown significantly since we rounded them yesterday, and that's not surprising, that's okay. Most of that process is A, flavor development, and B, relaxation. They're going to stretch more easily after that long cold period. So let's do some shaping. I'm gonna start with a little bit of flour on the bench. I wanna work with a fair amount of flour on the work surface here. These doughs are quite sticky. If I just touch them like right on top, they are tacky, right? So I'm gonna move it onto this bed of flour, and that's where I'm gonna work. You could also use semolina here. This would be a great place to use semolina. It doesn't really matter, whatever you're most comfortable with. So I'll pick it up, plop it onto the flour, and usually I'll turn it once just to make sure that I'm sort of coated on both sides. And you know, shaping can be a lot of stretching, and you'll see people throwing and all of that stuff, but the truth is that most of the work can be done right on the bench itself, okay? So I'm gonna start and work my way to the edges, and I'm leaving a little bit of a sort of ring around the outside, and I'm pressing that gas out to that ring. So I'm really flattening almost all the way, but not all the way to that edge. Most of my shaping work can actually be done without even picking it up. So I'm just pressing out to the edge. Some people like to have a second hand there, sort of giving yourself something to push against. Most of my pressure, though, is sort of downward, and I'm leaving that ring intact. It almost begins to look like a frisbee or something. And then I can pick it up and slowly and gently start to stretch. And I'm not squeezing that edge, I'm leaving that ring intact. And I'm just gently pulling with my hands laterally. And because this dough is well hydrated and well fermented, and because of the qualities of 00 flour, it stretches quite easily and thinly. If you find that a hole develops or something like that, you can usually recover from that. You know, just try and press it back together. You do want to attend to it though, because if you don't and you end up in a situation where you've got a hole in it and then you put sauce on it, that's a good recipe for sticking to the peel and having some problems when you go to load. I like to confirm that I'm in the realm of the right size. You know, it's 12, I'm at 12 inches. If you want a puffier edge crust, don't stretch all the way to 12, right? Leave yourself with an edge that's more intact and less sort of messed with, right? For me, for this pizza, I'm going for something that's thin with a little puffy ring around the outside. That dough is ready, and I'll grab my peel. You know, if you've been doing pizza for a while, you may be comfortable just putting the dough right onto your peel with a little bit of semolina or cornmeal. If you're new to the game, or if you're doing something like maybe you only have 4 doughs and you don't want to like use one to learn on and have it stuck to the peel or something, a good trick is to use a little bit of parchment. I'm using a cake circle, high heat parchment that's cut into a round. I can put it down on my peel, and then if you want, you know, a little bit of semolina or cornmeal, just for those portions where the parchment doesn't reach, and then I can move it over and put it right onto the peel. And what that's gonna do is that's gonna keep that dough floating on the peel for me while I top it. So one of the most important things that I think that people overlook with pizza making is they don't do their sort of mise en place, which means like to put things in place. So that means like once the dough is stretched, that's not the time to go open a can of tomatoes and make your sauce or chop your tomatoes or whatever it is, right? You want to have your toppings in place and ready to go. I have this beautiful tray of gorgeous things, look at that. So I think for the first pie, I've got some choices here, but I think I'm going to use a little bit of red sauce. So as far as sauces go, you can do whatever you want. You can buy one that's made. or you can follow a recipe. We have a really good one that's attached to our New Haven style pizza video. I just make the sauce right in the can from whole peeled tomatoes, add a little bit of seasoning and then puree them. I'm gonna do a little bit of red sauce, and then I have some mozzarella. So this is fresh. You can use whole milk mozzarella. You can use whatever kind of cheese you want, right? This is, at this point in the show, you can sort of pick your own adventure. I'm gonna do a little bit of olive oil, just right around, just a drizzle, and then a little bit of Parmesan. And all of these things are really just to sort of bring in a little bit more flavor. So we're ready to go. And before you launch, what you want to make sure is you got to take a second and do a little bit of a jiggle. Make sure that you're not adhered to the peel. Okay, so the pizza's ready to go in the oven. 2 quick notes. 1, make sure that oven is hot. If you need to confirm it with an infrared thermometer or something like that to make sure that you have high heat, that is key for the best possible pizza. And the other thing is that pizza is cooking more than baking at this point. And what I mean by that is keep your eyes involved, keep your nose involved, make sure that you're there at the oven, don't wander off too far. It's not a time to sort of check out like we did for the long period of bulk fermentation or even the overnight period, right? Stay engaged with the oven. It's important with the home ovens, and it's especially important with the hot tabletop ovens as well. Load it, slides off that peel easy with that parchment. Now, it's gonna bake, recipe says, at least 10 minutes. I'm gonna keep an eye on it, and I'm gonna bake to the color that I like. You do the same. Bake to the color that you prefer, but make sure that it's fully baked. We're looking for a nice, crisp undercarriage and well-baked toppings. Good. I might not want to talk right now. I might just want to eat. So we've made 3 different pizzas. I've got a classic margarita. I have one with sausage and onions, and then I have this one with pepperoni and a little bit of spicy honey on it. Y'all, it's a sourdough pizza crust. Great recipe from Brian Ford. Crispy, crunchy. If you want a crust that tastes like your best loaf of sourdough bread with lots of crunch, that open interior, the beautiful fermentation qualities of a little bit of whole grain, this is it. It is strongly flavored. It will stand up to things like pepperoni and hot honey. You can have sort of a wild fandango in thinking of toppings like caramelized onions with barbecue sauce and pulled pork or whatever it is. This is a great, flavorful base. If you're someone who doesn't eat your crusts, maybe you're about to break that trend. It's delicious. So, so good.